Either person can sit at either place.
Either place?
Whatever's good for you.
I don't think either one of us has a good side.
You don't
so
have
it
a
doesn't
good
matter.
side, it doesn't
We're
matter.
both bad sides.
All right, me too. We're both of the follically challenged. So thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. And the thing that to me is so frustrating is that this cataclysmic thing happened to our country, and people don't seem to understand it, understand the gravity of it. And, you guys were talking about how, it's unusual for people who have been, how many years experience do you have between you, would you say?
Jim has several hundred, I think.
Probably 80 or 90 between the two of us.
So here you are with all that experience. Have you ever seen anything like this happen in this country? I mean, anything like this kind of attack on our political system?
Well, no, not at least to me, as disturbing as this. I'm a Vietnam War veteran. I went through all the stresses that in the aftermath of the Vietnam War, but I never felt even then that our fundamental institutions were jeopardized. In fact, our fundamental institutions proved themselves resilient then, and we actually came out of all that a better country. And hopefully we'll have the same experience now.
To me, it underscores 2 points. One is how determined Mr. Putin is to shape the political landscape both inside of Russia as well as outside of Russia. Whether it be in Europe or the United States or the Middle East or other places, he seeks ways to manipulate and exploit the environments. But secondly, it really does underscore just how consequential that digital domain is. And as Jim noted, we've seen these things being done by the Russians over the course of many years. But the fact now that this digital environment, this cybersphere, gives the Russian intelligence security services so much more opportunity to manipulate and to exploit. And they took full advantage of that in the 2016 election. That's why we saw things of much greater concern and intensity than we'd ever seen before. And I think Americans really need to understand just how vulnerable we are to exploitation of the environment by malign actors around the globe.
Is it something that we did not see happening, that we couldn't foresee? I mean, because, we talked about, 9/11, the planes hitting a building. It seems like they found a huge seam in the
Russians,
system.
and this goes back to the Soviet era, there's a long history of them intervening and influencing elections, theirs and other people's. And there's historical records that they've attempted to interfere in virtually all of our national elections since the 60s. But never this aggressive, direct, or multidimensional. And of course, as John indicated, they're taking advantage of a huge enabler, the internet and all the technology that gives you, and the ability to influence opinion. A way they've found to attack us is to undermine our fundamental system.
I don't think that, from my standpoint, I don't think that we, in all of the technological revolution that we've seen over the years, I don't think we have fully understood the power of what it could do. I mean, we certainly understood spreading information, getting word out, being able to, cross boundaries with information. But I don't think we ever thought, I don't know if you hadn't thought how it could be weaponized to this extent. I mean, was that something that occurred to you, or did you see that as something?
For me, probably not. That's why when this all began to unfold in 15 and 16, and it was kind of insidious as we became more aware of what they were doing, and then I think in the late summer, early fall of 16, when you really saw the magnitude of what they were doing. And for me, I've seen a lot of bad stuff in my 50 years in intelligence, but nothing, I don't recall anything that gave me viscerally, in the pit of my stomach, a more uncomfortable, uneasy feeling than when I realized what the Russians were doing.
Right.
The Russians have conducted active measures for many, many years. And in the physical domain, you have certain indicators and signatures that you can forensically then, connect so that you can trace it back then to the ultimate perpetrator or who directed it. But now, just like with terrorists and organized criminals and others, intelligence services can do things in that cyber domain that they can really camouflage and mask their steps. So I think we always anticipated that the Russians will continue to try to exploit certain situations. But now with this digital environment, it's become much more challenging for intelligence, security, and law enforcement services to understand exactly who is behind some of these activities that really make it very challenging for us to understand who is actually directing these actions.
You guys were there when you saw the initial attack. And, you hear this term all the time, collusion, conspiracy, coordination. I mean, these things are thrown around all over the place. But the idea of active measures that the Russians have, trafficked in for forever. What does that look like? I mean, what would, like, in a political campaign like this, what does an active measure look like?
Well, I think a lot of times what the Russians, as well as others, do is to either fabricate a story or to take a story that may be patently false, but yet advances one's narrative and argument and push it out and propagate it and lends legitimacy to it. And so it's a way to color people's perceptions and impressions of individuals.
I understand that St. Petersburg is pushing out, trolls and bots and getting, messages out and piggybacking on messages that, the Trump campaign is doing. Is there any, granularity to getting into these districts in Wisconsin or Michigan or, did they play on that level?
It appears now that it was pretty sophisticated, and they did focus on certain voter blocks. And, of course, 70 or 80,000 votes in 3 states would have swung the election. And apparently, the Russians have gone to school on our system, understand it. We've had very successful campaigns in this country. President Obama, case in point, where they did this micro-analysis on a district-by-district, precinct-by-precinct basis.
They would understand that based on just, observing American television, or they need some kind of help through a Cambridge Analytica or people on the ground who have been, assets that have been developed over many years?
That's a good question. They could have, but it's very clear that they understood the dynamic, the political dynamics, political landscape here, and they certainly understood how to use tools to exploit it.
The Russians take full advantage of the openness of our society. They have operated here in the United States for many, many years. So they can have access to experts and others who they try to elicit information from, even those individuals who do not even know that they're interacting or supporting the Russians.
Yeah.
So we're looking at the different attack vectors. Information was one of them in terms of what they were pushing out. Collecting information from the Internet in terms of the email theft that went on with the DCCC, the DNC. But also we knew from experience that the Russians had many different methods of influencing elections in Europe. Getting politicians to accept money, trying to get push money into political parties, maybe camouflaging the source, and extorting and even blackmailing individuals to work with them. We've seen that across the board, and there's a lot of publicly available information and stories about that.
To try to understand the intersection between money laundering, cyber warfare, and influence peddling. I mean, how does all of that work?
Well, to the extent that you can hide the money, hide the disguise sources of funding for political action groups, which may be quite legitimate. They'll use financial instrumentalities to hide the passage of that funding to political movements or interest groups. But I do know that collusion is clearly a tool in the kit bag that the Russians will use.
Right.
So any way they can co-opt somebody,
right,
recruit them, influence them, even on where the party that they're recruiting is unwitting, they'll do it. And I suspect they did so at every opportunity where they saw an opening, they'll exploit it.
But following that financial trail is so critically important on so many aspects of national security. We do it in the terrorism realm. We do it in the counterintelligence realm. We do it in the proliferation arena as well. And the FBI financial investigators, as well as the intelligence community financial analysts, they are tremendous. And that's why I do have confidence that Bob Mueller and others are going to get to the bottom of some of this. by tracing the money and see what might have, circumvented the normal procedures for moving money, and was there a motivation, a political motivation behind it, either on the giver or the receiver's part?
I mean, listen, we talk about, our system, our democratic way of life came under attack. I mean, we use those terms, because they attacked an election. But we don't talk about it in terms of war. I mean, it's cyber war, and it's there's no tanks, there's no planes, there's no infantry. I mean, there's none of that. And yet, perhaps Putin thinks of it as, because if you say it's been going on for a long time, which it has been, since probably the Tsarist days, it is a war. It's a war for wrestling for an ideology, whether or not democracy is going to survive. He's been trying to undermine it for forever. So in his mind, it is a war. So how do we respond?
Yeah, I think we have to strengthen that cyber environment, certainly. We learned some very painful lessons because of 9/11. But as a result of 9/11, the Congress established a commission, 9/11 Commission, that tried to address those gaps, those shortcomings. I have been a long proponent of having a similar type of commission established by Congress, an independent commission, that can take a look at what we need to do in the future to better protect and safeguard that environment, and have the engineers and futurists and technologists and scientists and U.S. officials and private sector, all of them getting together, something akin to a major undertaking to look at it strategically. So trying to strengthen that environment, and it's not just against attempts to interfere in the election, but also, again, criminals and terrorists and pedophiles and others. And I don't think we as a country have yet come to terms with what the role of the government is in that environment.
And why do you think that didn't happen? I mean, when the buildings were hit, or when the bombs hit Pearl Harbor, we all came together as a country. We knew we had been attacked in some level. Now, I understand this is a much more insidious type of attack that you don't feel right away, but it is an attack at the fabric of democracy. There's no question about it. Why isn't it that we didn't respond the way we, why wasn't there, George W. Bush standing on the pile of rubble saying, you'll hear from all of us? I mean, our democracy was attacked.
Precisely because we didn't have a pile of rubble. Things in the physical domain that you can see, feel, and touch, destroyed buildings, people killed, wounded, injured, that has a much more apparent, immediate and indelible impact on people than something in the cyber domain, which is a bit more ethereal, and it's hard to, doesn't have physical attributes, so it's harder to get your arms around.
Well, for instance, after 9/11, George W. Bush was reluctant initially to have a 9/11 commission because, obviously, from a political standpoint, he might be blamed for not, being more proactive or whatever. But ultimately, he agreed to do it because the country's security and the protection of our country was more important and trumped any kind of, personal, political gain that he had. But I don't see that now. I don't see that, and that's what scares me.
It really comes down, I think, to leadership. And as long as the occupant of the Oval Office continues to refute the unanimous assessment of CIA, FBI, and NSA about what they did, and continues to ignore, I think, the real challenges to our system of government by what the Russians and others can do, it undercuts any effort to try to deal with this issue comprehensively, strategically, and thoughtfully. And until that leadership that comes out of the White House is really going to say, this is critically important for our future as a country and as a democracy, it's going to be a really tough road.
And why doesn't he? Why isn't that? I mean, I understand, his feeling like maybe it's going to delegitimize his election, and, I don't know. We don't know where any of these investigations are going to go. But we're talking about our country. Yeah. Our democracy is at stake here. So
when we briefed, John and I and
you guys were there
briefed
when this happened.
The president-elect at the time on January 6th, I think he viewed what we presented to him, which had very high confidence levels in what we presented them, which, by the way, a point I'll make, had nothing to do with the dossier. We did not draw on the dossier. The dossier, the infamous dossier, was not a part of our intelligence community assessment.
Right.
What we did present, we had very, very high confidence level in. And I believe his first reaction to it was that this caused a question about the legitimacy of his election, which wasn't the intent at all. And yeah, I get it, that's important. But the bigger issue here, and what is bothersome to me, is the singular indifference to the threat posed by Russia.
To me, the way I see it, it goes beyond, not pushing back. There's been an active, effort on the administration's part to denigrate the intelligence community, to denigrate law enforcement and the Justice Department. And to me, that's the most disturbing, because we're talking about pillar. It's one thing to say fake news, and the media is, destroyed, or he tries to destroy the credibility of the media. But he's trying to destroy the credibility of our security system.
Well, I have said consistently that in the case of the intelligence community, I believe the intelligence community as an institution will continue to convey truth to power. And whether the power accepts that truth or not, well, that's another issue. Now, I don't know how long that can be sustained. I do worry about that, but I believe the fundamental instincts of the community are to do the right thing. I do worry about the denigration of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the premier law enforcement organization on the planet, which is composed of 35,000 plus people. They're humans. Do they make mistakes? Sure. Does the Bureau make mistakes as an institution? Yes. But overall, when you think about what the Bureau does for this country, day in and day out, rank and file, patriotic, dedicated professionals all over this country and all over the world, keeping this nation safe and secure. And I wish we could keep that in perspective.
Yeah, the comments coming out of Mr. Trump's mouth have been very dispiriting to the professionals at CIA, FBI, NSA, and others who really dedicate their lives with great sacrifice, and certainly very dispiriting to their families that make great sacrifices on behalf of their loved ones, as well as it sends, I think, a very bad message to the people of the United States, which is that these are the institutions that were established to protect our democracy, our security, our safety. It also sends a very bad signal to the world that if the person who holds the title of president denigrates, disparages the work and the professionalism and the integrity of the FBI and CIA and others, how then is the rest of the world going to look at those institutions? How are the CIA and FBI going to be able to work with counterparts around the globe on issues related to, life and death matters, whether it be terrorism or proliferation or whatever, or interference in democratic systems? So the power of those words that have come out, I think, cannot be sort of understated. And I'm hoping we're going to be able to get through this very, very, I think, very sad chapter of our history. But I have great confidence that the professionals that Jim and I work with at the organizations are trying to do their very best to protect this country, because that's why they do what they do. They love this country, and irrespective of the denigration, irrespective of the lack of honesty and integrity of the people at the highest levels of government, the professionals in intelligence and law enforcement will do their work.
One of the great resources that we've been given is the wisdom of the Founding Fathers to create a Constitution upon which we can build this wonderful, now 241-year experiment that we've had. And my fear is that those pillars of that institution are being torn away. The press, the law enforcement, intelligence, and we're seeing no checks and balances coming from the Congress. That's my fear, and the question I always have is, is our Constitution created strong enough to withstand this kind of assault?
I hope and pray that that Constitution, which has stood us in great stead for many, many years, will sustain us through this bad period. But in the end, it's how we as a nation and how the nation's leadership, and I mean by that both the Congress and the administration, the executive branch, well they abide by it.
The President of the United States needs to speak with the greatest amount of precision, honesty, and integrity, because he or she speaks to the world, and he or she serves as a role model every moment of every day.
People who have held very high positions in the intelligence community, as you guys have, obviously, don't normally come out and speak out the way you have been speaking out. What is it the reason you come out? Why do you do that?
For me, this has been very difficult. I've toiled in the trenches of intelligence for every president since and including John F. Kennedy. My dad was an Army officer. I've been a political appointee in both Republican and Democratic administrations. So I've always been instinctively apolitical. The oath of office you take, though, is not to a person. You don't pledge loyalty to a person. You pledge loyalty to the Constitution. And because our institutions that underpin this country are under assault, both from external sources, Russia, and internal sources, that I need to speak.
Both Jim and I and other senior intelligence officers love this country, and we have worked long and hard to do what we could in our own little individual ways to contribute to this country's safety and security. I never thought I would witness what I've been seeing over the past year as far as what is happening to our government, the dishonesty, the lack of integrity, the lack of ethics. We spent our lives looking at foreign governments and countries and analyzing them and seeing how corruption and incompetence and ineptness and lack of ethics undermined the ability of countries to thrive. And I never thought I would see some of those similar types of traits and attributes here.